Shalom, my name is Ayelet. I was born and raised in Israel, and Hebrew is my native language. In this video, I will teach you about the Hebrew word for Sabbath, Shabbat. Say it with me. Shabbat, Shabbat. The root of the word Shabbat is the verb Shavat. You might have seen it translated as rested, but the more literal translation would be ceased or came to a stop, especially from work, while rested is implied. The theological meaning of the word Shavat can be found in Genesis 2:2, when after 6 days of creation, God completes by the seventh day his work which he has made, and ceases by the seventh day from all his work which he has made. God created the universe in 6 days, and on the seventh day he came to a stop, ceased or rested. He didn't rest because he was tired, but by doing so he marked the completion of his work of creation and initiated a weekly pattern for us to follow. This pattern becomes the basis for keeping the Shabbat day on the seventh day of the week. In verse 3, God blesses the seventh day and sanctifies it, for in it he has ceased, Shavat, from all his work which God had created for making. So the seventh day is set apart and above other days. It's not until Exodus 16, after God provides manna for the Israelites and instructs them to gather twice as much on the sixth day so they could rest on the seventh day. This is the first commandment given for the seventh day. Then in Exodus 16:23, the seventh day is called Shabbat for the first time when Moses says, "This is what Adonai has said, tomorrow is a Shabbat rest, a holy Shabbat to Adonai." It is interesting to note that the first commandment for the Shabbat was given before the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. This means that Shabbat was actually observed before God wrote it on tablets of stone. It also means that Shabbat observance is not limited to or by the Mosaic covenant. So I think it's very possible that the concept of Shabbat as a day of rest was already known and practiced among the people, maybe even as early as Adam and Eve, but again, that is just a possibility. If you like my channel, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with others, maybe even join as a member. Also, check out my crash course in Hebrew reading and pronunciation, where I teach you all the basics so you can start reading Hebrew on your own in only 6 short lessons. And yes, it's all free. In Exodus 20, God gives the 10 commandments and dedicates the 4th commandment to the Shabbat day. There is something in the way God lists the 10 commandments that we need to pay attention to. The first 3 commandments focus on a right relationship with God. The 4th commandment for the Shabbat day makes the connection between a right relationship with God to a right relationship with our family, servants, and animals. And the 5th commandment emphasizes the importance of and the blessing that comes from honoring and respecting our parents. The last 5 commandments focus on a right relationship between one person to another. Together, and specifically in this particular order, the 10 commandments make up God's recipe for the life that he intended for us. In his recipe, Shabbat observance is a must-have ingredient. So if you take it out, it's just not going to turn out as good. In Exodus 31, God emphasizes the importance of the Shabbat commandments again and adds that the Shabbat is also an affirmation of Israel's identity. It is a sign between me and the sons of Israel for all time. For in 6 days Adonai made the heavens and the earth, and in the 7th day he has ceased and is refreshed. So the Shabbat is also the sign of the Mosaic covenant, and therefore is a central part of Judaism. Echad Ha'am, a Russian Jewish thinker and founder of cultural Zionism, said that more than Israel have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept Israel. This statement emphasizes the importance of the Shabbat to Jewish identity and community, and how it has helped preserve the Jewish people. More commandments, instructions, and prohibition for the Shabbat are given throughout the Bible. The word Shabbat is mentioned over 100 times in the Hebrew Scriptures, and about 60 times in the New Testament. So obviously, the Shabbat is one of the most sacred times in Scripture and is extremely important to God. There are many questions and arguments people raise about the Shabbat, like, what does it mean to observe it? Or who is it really for? Should it be observed on Saturday or Sunday? Or is it even relevant at all? These arguments can become very legalistic and judgmental, and with the many rabbinical regulations and traditions that people attach to it, The Shabbat might seem more of a burden instead of the blessing that God intended for it to bring. In its essence, the Shabbat is a weekly day of rest, given to us by God as a blessing for our own well-being. Its primary purpose has always been to be a spiritual and physical blessing to all. It is to be a delight and a joy, not a burden. The Shabbat brings a state of peace and fellowship with God. It's a weekly reminder that we are dependent on a God who cares for and sustains us. When we observe or keep the Shabbat, we receive the spiritual and physical blessings that it promises. So what does it really mean to observe or keep Shabbat? The truth is that according to God's calendar, the first day of the week was Sunday, so the seventh day Shabbat was on Saturday. The biblical Shabbat starts at sundown on Friday evening and ends at sundown on Saturday evening. It wasn't until mid-1st century that believers started to also gather on Sunday to worship in celebration of Yeshua's resurrection. And by the 2nd century, Sunday officially became the Christian day of worship or the Lord's Day. Christians worship on Sundays in celebration of the resurrection of Jesus, and there is nothing wrong in worshiping on any day of the week. But it is very important to remember that Sunday worship is not commended in the Bible, and while the New Testament describes Christians gathering and worshiping on Sundays, it nowhere states that Sunday has replaced Saturday as the Shabbat. With that said, I believe that the argument of Saturday versus Sunday is not as important as long as we maintain a weekly rhythm with a Shabbat day that is set aside to separate between what is common and what is holy. Depending on your faith or where you are in the world, your Shabbat might already be on Saturday or on Sunday, maybe even on both of those days. The important thing is to make sure that we set apart a day of rest from our daily works, a day of reflection, worship, and fellowship, and that we do that in honor of God and all that He has created and done for us. There are many Jewish traditions associated with Shabbat observance that help set the day apart and create a sacred atmosphere in our homes, like the greeting Shabbat Shalom, dressing in white, lighting Shabbat candles, reciting different blessings, singing, etc. These are beautiful traditions that have helped preserve the Jewish people throughout the times, and anyone should feel free to embrace them if it brings joy and closeness to God. But remember that these are traditions, not commandments, and should never, in my opinion, become legalistic or a burden. Yeshua said, "The Shabbat was made for men, not men for the Shabbat." He spoke up when he believed that Shabbat regulations failed to achieve its intended state of spiritual rest and offered himself as a source of eternal Shabbat rest. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." In the book of Hebrews we read, "So there remains a Shabbat rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered God's rest has also ceased from his own work, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fall through the same pattern of disobedience." As believers, Yeshua is our spiritual rest, now and for eternity. Another point is that observing the Shabbat and God's appointed times today can be seen as preparation for the future kingdom. According to Isaiah 66, the Shabbat and other appointed times will continue and will be celebrated universally in the Millennial kingdom. The Saturday Shabbat will be reaffirmed as an eternal principle. And it will come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Shabbat to another, all flesh will come to bow down before me, says Adonai. So we can see that God's instructions for the Shabbat remain significant and eternal. We can look forward to a time when God will restore all things and His reign will be universally acknowledged, a time when everyone will worship God in unity and will observe Saturday as the Shabbat day. Whatever you believe, I think we can all agree that intentionally setting apart time to experience rest refreshes us, helps us focus on the work we are called to do here on earth, and gives us a taste of what's to come. I hope this will encourage you to reflect on your week, your life, and your walk with God, and to try and embrace God's gift of Shabbat. You will surely be blessed by it. To learn more, visit my website, thewordinhebrew.com, and until next time, Shalom and God bless.